why did Richard Branson's solar system, why did his entire house, his entire state be flattened, but his solar system was survived and was producing power during the storm, immediately after the storm?
Hello and hi friends. We are live from Climate Week NYC, joined by the brilliant Justin Locke, the Managing Director of RMI's Global South Programme, which includes small island developing states, sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, where he focuses on climate finance access and workforce development. He's joining us today to chat all things energy resilience and energy transition, discuss what's been going on in Puerto Rico recently with Hurricane Fiona, and to tell us some more about these pretty cool things called solar arrays. Let's get into it.
So when you work in climate, you don't always have really good news stories to tell. But I'm going to challenge you, Justin, by starting us off by telling us a good news story. All
right. Well, I'll start telling that story with a little bit of bad news, but it'll lead to good news.
Typical.
Right?
Absolutely.
2017, right, hurricane season. I think many of us are aware, at least those in North America, right? You had two Cat 5 hurricanes 10 days between each other, Hurricane Irma and Maria, right? Devastated about 5 or 6 islands across the Caribbean. Global news, right? It was all over the news for many months. Obviously, headlined by Puerto Rico, power down for 6 months, right? Disaster really characterized by impacts to the energy sector, right? So multiple islands lost power for multiple months, primarily because these are islands that rely on diesel generation, right? With overhead distribution, transmission distribution lines, right? So highly exposed energy system, centralized, that whole thing. We also at the time had several solar arrays that were powering part of these energy systems in these countries.
And a solar array is just...
So solar arrays are like a large centralized solar plant, right? Generating, like a solar farm.
Cool.
And several of these solar systems took direct hits by a Cat 5 hurricane. One of which that was really in the media in the UK was Richard Branson's home island of Necker. His solar system took a direct hit, right? And his whole kind of estate was devastated. Well, what we found was that, if the islands are going to move through the energy transition, they have to build systems to withstand these storms, because we know that this is just the beginning, right? This is going to continue to happen. And what we found is that several systems, obviously several systems completely were destroyed. But then we found there's actually a number of systems that survived this direct hit. And we got to figure out why. Like, why did Richard Branson's solar system, why did his entire house, his entire state be flattened, but his solar system was survived and was producing power during the storm, immediately after the storm? Like, why? And let's learn from that.
What's going on there?
What's going on there? So we commissioned a study and did a lot of on-the-ground assessment, and we determined why the ones that survived, and actually encapsulated that in a report called Solar Under Storm, right? That set the industry standards for the design and construction of these assets to withstand these storms in the future, right? And then we needed to apply that, right? So fast forward to the Bahamas, right? So we worked with the government of the Bahamas to install a 1 megawatt solar farm, right? So 1 megawatt is the kind of the size of the power that this system can produce. Designed with these design standards for the first time ever that these design standards has been applied in a real project. A few years later, Hurricane Dorian, another Cat 5 hurricane, rips through the Bahamas. Also known as Hurricane Alley, because it's where all the majority of the hurricanes happen.
Right.
Entire power system goes down, except this system, this solar array that was built.
The new one.
Right. Was producing power not only during the storm, but immediately afterwards, right? So it survived without a scratch.
During the hurricane?
It was still working, producing power during the... So, wow. So basically the proof of concept was proven. Right. What was more important, and I think the human element of this, is that you had, upwards of 90,000 people lose power for multiple weeks. That system that was interconnected with a national stadium, which then became the national shelter. It was one of the few places that had power where, medical supplies could be plugged in, communications could be plugged in, and actually was the lifeblood of that island, Nassau, the main island in the Bahamas, for several weeks until power was restored. Wow. Right? So you can see the benefit of a decentralized solar system like this, built to withstand, and how that can be scaled not only across the Caribbean, but the Gulf Coast of the United States, anywhere along the equator, right, that is exposed to high wind events, Southeast Asia,
right,
other parts of the world, right? So just an incredible. So
I
again,
love
bad
this
news,
story.
and then
So
good
I love
news.
this story so much. It just so illustrates to me how you can take learning and apply it and have a real solution that people need, not like 25 years in the future, but right now, and how it can be scaled. I kind of want us to rewind a bit, because there was this kind of solar array, but you've talked about these decentralized energy systems. So I want us to dig into it, because this is an example of that, right? So can you tell us about what they are and what they mean and why they're so important? Because this is really I love this story so much.
Yeah, I mean, well, it comes down to the fact that in developed economies, they followed essentially an energy system architecture of a large centralized fossil fuel plant far away from where we all live, in a room probably like we're in now, producing power long distances and transmit long distances through overhead lines to where we people consume it and businesses consume that power.
Right.
What our founder, Amory Levin's RMI, right, in the 1970s, during the energy crisis, had a different vision of how energy systems should be designed.
Right.
Where they actually, a more decentralized architecture where you have smaller generating assets that are actually part of the natural landscape, closer to where people and businesses consume that power,
right.
Fueled primarily not with fossil fuels, but with indigenous renewable energy. And that the hypothesis in the 1970s, when he invented essentially, this is what we refer to as the distributed energy resource, was that would be a lower cost of electricity and a more energy secure electricity, right? Because this was during the big energy crisis of the 1970s, right? And obviously, here we are again in another global energy crisis. What Amory didn't realize at that point was that is actually is a more resilient system, both from a climate impact perspective and from an economic perspective. And what we've demonstrated in developing country contexts is the optimal pathway for improved human development outcomes, better health outcomes, better educational outcomes, better societal outcomes for economic benefit. And why is that? It's because it's a more equitable system and a more resilient system. So let's depack that a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Right?
Because I'm not sure I understand the link.
So let's depack that a little bit, right? So centralized fossil fuel generating plant, right? Long transmission distribution, right? The further you or any business are away from where that power is generated, the more likely you're going to have a disruption to your power.
Okay.
Right?
Because there's more things that can happen along the way.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So you have 20 miles of transmission line. At any point of that 20 miles, something happens to that line, you're going to lose power.
Yeah.
But the closer you are, right, I mean, you have less probability of that happening.
Right.
That's inherently inequitable. And what we find in these type of system architecture is that the more storms we have, I don't care if it's fires in California, whether it's floods and storms in the South and the Southeast, whether it's flooding in the central part of the United States, the further you are away from where that power is generated, the more likely that you are to have impact to your power. These storms are increasing, and not always the case, but in most cases, that disproportionately impacts the poor. Because the poor tend to live in more rural areas, further away from where that power is generated.
Okay.
Right? So that is the equity component. The resiliency component is, again, similar concept. The closer you are to where that power is generated, the more likely you're going to maintain that power during a storm, because the exposure of the system is less in terms of you and where that power is generated. Right.
Margin of error is smaller.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our concept towards building a true resilient society is, what do we rely on as a society for everything, right? It's power, right? But it's really our critical facilities. So our health facilities, our education facilities, our telecommunications, right? How do you get money out of the bank, right? It's wired through an electronic system.
True
right?
story, yeah.
So
that does actually happen, everyone.
So if you look at a society our critical facilities are what allow us to function
Right.
and provide equity to us, right, for those services. Every critical facility should have a decentralized energy resource that is interconnected with it to ensure that if anything happens to the central system, that power is still maintained through that distributed energy resource.
So
right?
when you say a decentralized energy resource, you mean a locally centralized energy resource?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah,
A local, but I mean, it's distributed in terms of the system. But yeah, centralized, and that can be wind, that can be solar, that can be battery energy storage, it can be a combination of those things, right?
Okay.
Take in point Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico just got hit by Hurricane Fiona, right? We've been deploying these, what we call microgrids, so solar and storage, interconnected systems to these critical facilities, right? We all know Puerto Rico has lost, most of the island has lost power right now. All this critical facilities that had interconnected systems, these distributed energy resources, are all up and running right now.
Oh my gosh.
It really makes a difference in like actual people's lives,
That is
right?
so important.
Right, hospitals. Like I've just been thinking a lot about like people who are in hospitals, people who rely on refrigeration for the medication, all of these things, right?
Let's take this. During COVID, right? Say here in New York, where we are right now, these hospitals were maxed out in the early stages, right? What if any of those hospitals lost centralized power?
Yeah.
Sure, they may have some diesel backup, but what we find is that diesel runs out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right.
Every hospital should have an interconnected system, a distributed energy resource that ensures that power supply no matter what happens, designed for the elements.
So when you say interconnected, you mean it's got its own solar panels, for example, or solar whatever power system, and then it's also connected to all the other hospitals that also have that?
Well, I'm saying it's interconnected with the grid. So,
right,
the electrical grid that's providing power to that hospital, that school, whatever, this system's actually interconnected, and it's working with that system. So it's actually, during normal times of operation, it's actually lowering your cost of electricity,
right,
because you're using renewable energy to power the majority of your system, and then supplementing that with the grid.
Right.
When that centralized power is cut off, you have that power source that's providing you all the necessary power that you need.
Yeah.
Then that's real resiliency. And look, we all know where the climate's going, and these storms are just going to intensify.
Yeah.
We have to relook at our mental model of how we develop our energy systems. And we think Amory's original vision of the soft energy pathway, distributed energy resources, are a great way to get there to ensure an equitable society is built from the ground up and that maintains our health, our education, our telecommunications, and our economy.
And what's the soft energy pathway? Sorry.
That is actually Amory's original vision of what he refers to as like the distributed.
Oh, when you said it was built into the landscape.
His original hypothesis of this distributed energy system instead of this centralized energy system in the 1970s, it's coined the soft energy pathway.
Okay, right.
The hard energy pathway is the centralized fossil fuel system architecture.
And the soft one is everything we've been talking about. Right, okay, cool.
Exactly.
So
sorry.
It's good because the thing that really the reason why this captures my imagination as well so much is so you've got the resiliency piece, right? You've got the adaptation piece, that's happening. But the thing that I think is really exciting about this is also the applicability of it in places where there isn't a grid.
Yep.
Right? Where there isn't existing power that's reliable. And I'm wondering, Justin, you head up a program that works all over the world, globally, mainly in the global south. What is the potential there to stop communities that don't have access to power right now from, instead of going down a fossil fuel path, going down an alternative one?
Yeah. Well, the good thing about the global south developing countries is that they're developing their economies for the first time now, right? So it's not like we're waiting for these big fossil fuel assets to be decommissioned and replace it. They need to build energy now, and that's where all the global growth of energy is going to happen. Right. So we often say the global climate crisis will be won or lost in the global south, right? And distributed energy resources are that optimal pathway to develop. And what we refer to that as this is a leapfrog opportunity. You can leapfrog from the 20th century fossil fuel systems to the 21st century distributed energy resource systems that we've been talking about, right? And every country context has a different application of those. So, we talked about the Caribbean and the ability to build climate resilience using distributed energy resources. In Africa, we have, the majority of the unelectrified population of the world, right? 650 million people live in Africa without any access to electricity. Now, the way we address this in the global north, what we did in our countries where we live is that we subsidize this energy build out of transmission lines to everyone living everywhere in the countries where we live, right? And that was all subsidized by taxpayer dollars, extending long transmission lines into remote areas. Distributed energy resources, you don't need to build out that infrastructure. You can just provide that electricity on site with no interconnection to centralized grid and electrify. And it is the cheapest way and most sustainable way to electrify the 650 million people globally currently living without power.
And the way that survives natural disasters.
Exactly. Right. And we also have found during COVID, when there was a lot of economic contractions, is the energy systems anywhere in the world that had more distributed energy resources on the grid also operated better during that time of economic contraction, when inherently, we had shifts from everyone working in the city and all that power had to be shifted to the suburbs. Right?
Yeah.
Distributed energy resources helped shift that power demand, right? And meet it sustainably and more effectively as all that power demand was moving to different locations. Right. So it's actually a much more economically resilient system, climate resilient system, and the optimal form of providing energy access to the unelectrified people of this world.
And in the global south, where for like places where they don't have electricity at the moment, you say it's a leapfrog opportunity because there's no transition necessary. It's just building of new.
Well, you're using a 21st century technology in solar, battery energy storage, right?
You don't have to put up a grid.
Rather than extending, a transmission line 250 miles to the middle of nowhere for 100 people. Right? It doesn't make any economic sense.
I guess the idea, because we talked earlier with a number of different people talking about I'm going to start that question again. So we've heard earlier how when you build fossil fuel infrastructure, it takes a long time to build, it's really expensive, and then it's there for 70 years, right? So I guess if I'm understanding this correctly, what you're saying is that there are parts of the world where there is no plant already, there is no fossil fuel infrastructure, and instead of building it and then having to transition away from it, you can just jump from wherever you are now to an electrified future that is renewable and it's clean and it's local and
lower cost. And lower cost.
Which is pretty exciting because I feel like we often talk about how we know the solutions, we have all the solutions we need, we don't just do them, but actually we never really talk about sometimes what those solutions are. And this for me is a very tangible, proven solution that seems like a no-brainer.
I mean, you would think so.
So we're going to ask the inevitable question, right? If it's a no-brainer, why is it not just everywhere?
Well, I mean, one, there is an inherent political economy that is inherent in the fossil fuel economy that is maintaining the status quo, where few companies and individuals are benefiting from that want to keep it the same. Right? And, you can argue that certain political parties have aligned with that to protect those interests, right? So that's one issue, and I think that's a solvable issue, right? The other issue is, to the example used earlier, if you're, say, electrifying a village of 100 people, right, in the middle of the Sahel, that's a pretty small system. So the cost of getting that small system out into the middle of nowhere is going to have a much higher logistical cost and therefore an overall cost to get it there, right? So there's often investors that just don't want to make that investment because it's too expensive, it's too small scale. And if you're financing a project, which most of this has to be commercially driven, it has to be able to be financed. It's just as much work for you to underwrite a small little tiny system as it is a massive one, right? The underwriting of the transaction. So the whole financial system architecture is designed around big projects, right? And how do you change that system and go, well, actually, we need these little projects financed too that nobody wants to finance because they're a lot of work and the return on investment is not as high.
It's a mindset shift, isn't it? It's really about moving from thinking that bigger is better, centralized is better, to realizing that there are some things that we can solve much more effectively in this decentralized, smaller way. I mean, that's how I feel. Because
no, absolutely. And I mean, there's also things that we're doing to make it more attractive to financiers. So rather than just saying, hey, we want to electrify this little community out here, or we want to create a resilient microgrid at this hospital in Puerto Rico or here, it's like, why don't we look at a portfolio of investments? So like 50, 60, 100 communities. Yeah. Let's aggregate these. They may be in completely different locations, but let's aggregate these and we package it as one project so that we bring in one, what we call an engineering procurement construction firm. So like who's actually going to build the thing. Yeah. You bring in one to do all of them, which so you minimize your kind of your overhead. And then you have one financier financing one project that may be actually 50 projects in 50 different locations, but they're packaged as one project. And that's the term that we refer to as aggregation for scale, right?
I love it because it feels like we have the climate solutions. What we need to do is change direction. And so it's all about figuring out ways to take people from just moving in the same direction, the same thing, and shifting them to move in a slightly different way, which I don't know how you feel about it, Ben, but feels like a much more doable thing.
Yeah, it feels very practical and manageable. Yeah, especially because you said that the underwriting of any one project is the same regardless of the size.
The same amount of work, right.
So is that reduced by putting a bunch of small projects together?
Well, it makes it more attractive to the financier, right? Because it's less work for more scale. Right, and then more opportunities for return on investment. And the IEA put out a report a few weeks ago on the state of the energy workforce, global energy workforce. A couple of things, some nuggets from that. One is that for every $1 million of invested in clean energy, so distributed energy resource, clean energy projects, you produce 7.6 jobs.
That's a lot.
So wait, say the numbers again. Sorry.
So for every $1 million invested in clean energy projects, the job benefit is 7.6 jobs for every $1 million invested. Right. For every fossil fuel project, every $1 million invested in a fossil fuel project, 2.4 jobs are created.
Oh, okay. So basically, fossil fuels are just trash. Like it doesn't actually help anyone ever.
I mean, I'm not going to say it, but you said it.
I mean,
fossil fuels are going to be a part of our life for a while, right? I mean, they do play a very critical role. But if we're thinking about the future,
right, and job creation, that is not. There's no. It's significant. That's 3 times as many jobs.
And to kind of extrapolate this into bigger numbers, right? So, in order to reach 50% reduction in global emissions by 2030, right? So the decisive decade. We need to create 14 million new jobs globally. And another 16 million jobs need to be transitioned from the fossil fuel sector into clean energy. All of those will require training. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we can't the labor market, we can't hire people, right? There's not enough people. So we need to create 30 million new jobs. We're not talking about this. When we talk about like, why isn't this happening? We don't have the workforce to build the stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Which is something that no one really talks about, right?
Right.
And actually is like a big thing because you can have all the solutions.
This is the first time I've heard it.
Yeah. And me too. Like you can have all the solutions.
What is the energy transition ultimately? We have to build all this new infrastructure.
Right.
We need engineers, project managers, project developers. We need the workforce to do that. We don't have it right now. We don't.
And it's in a way it's exciting, right? Because it feels like that's a good thing. Like having more jobs is a good thing. Needing more people is a good thing. And these are good jobs, right? These are not dangerous jobs. Yeah. They're not like, you're not mining coal down a shaft that's going to kill you in 40 years, But yeah, if we don't have them, if we don't think about it, then we're going to be stuck because we're going to have all these solutions and everything that could work and then no one to actually do the work.
Yeah, and it's equitable job creation. I mean, we all saw what happened in our politics, over the last few years. Like, the urban populations are growing in wealth and the rural populations are stagnating in growth in economic growth. And that's creating a lot of friction.
Yeah.
And it's delved into our politics and is the primary driver of all these different frictions. I don't care if you're in the US or in the UK, everywhere, we're all seeing it. This isn't a way to create jobs equitably, good paying jobs equitably across all those different prisms, economic prisms, rural, urban, because
everybody needs new power.
Everyone needs new decentralized power where you live.
Yeah.
And it's a way to invest in your own community.
Oh yeah, because it's local.
Yeah.
yeah. This is a good one.
I mean,
this is a good one.
Yeah, I love this. And it reminds me so much about a story I heard years ago about something called Barefoot College in India, right?
Barefoot College in India.
Yeah.
I got to
where
hear this one.
They basically, they train local people who do not have like university degrees. In fact, you're not allowed in the college if you have any kind of degree. And often people who cannot read or write in like, well, one of the big things they do is they train solar engineers from all around the world, and they only hire grandmothers. So they bring grandmothers from all around the world to India, and they train them to install and maintain solar arrays in their local communities. And they found that by training grandmothers,
everyone gets in line.
Well, everyone gets in line, but B, those grandmothers don't move out of the community.
Right.
They don't just like train them, send them back, and then that person moves to the capital.
Right.
They stay in the local community, maintaining these solar arrays, providing power, and like training up people around them. And it so reminds me of that initiative of when you break apart your thinking and you start to think about like real solutions and how can we make this a positive on multiple dimensions, and you remove your assumptions of who can and cannot have or do things, you can come up with these incredibly beautiful solutions that will benefit everyone.
Because grandmothers are the real hubs of knowledge, aren't they? In any community, they're the people that hold and pass on knowledge to next generations of
and
people.
They're not just
Yeah.
concerned about themselves. Yeah. So it just reminds me of that, because I think there's an opportunity here to like invest in communities in different ways.
Yeah.
So I think that's really exciting. I am so excited that Justin, you came and shared the story with us. This is one of my favorite news stories.
This is just so positive. And RMI have got a new grandma training program.
Yeah.
Which is also good.
Yeah, I know, which would be amazing. We want to see.
We might look into that, actually.
Yeah, that would be amazing. The division of grandmothers. Before we go, we have one last thing we want to ask you.
And now it's time for our climate confessions. Let's fess up to the bad habits we just can't kick.
So just so I'm clear, so it's something that I don't want to give up, or something that
something that you do that you know you maybe shouldn't do, but you're not going to stop.
Interesting.
We would tell you, we would share, but we've done this for 4 seasons now. So
I mean, you know, it may not. I actually have a pretty low footprint, honestly. Like, but I'm not trying to be
serious.
I don't drive an electric vehicle. Right, okay. I should drive an electric vehicle, and I often I remember being on the freeway and dropping my kids off, and you're in traffic, and all you see is this pollution going into the air, and I can't even see the mountains, and I'm like, why the hell am I driving this
Justin,
petrol
why are you?
car? And I'm like, oh, it's because I'm going to drive into the ground, and then I'm going to buy an electric vehicle. I'm like, just pony up, man.
Yeah,
and buy a freaking electric vehicle.
Very interesting. We've been doing interviews now in the US, and this is everyone's climate confession.
Every single person.
That's fine, but it's interesting because it's indicative of a system that is really in this country we're finding difficult to change, because also you're not living in places with good public transportation.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can just not have a car.
Right.
And so everyone has a car, and it's so interesting.
And for this, I think for this generation, right, there's been this paradigm of aspiration, which is having
a nice car.
Yeah, and having a petrol car, having a cool.
Well, I mean, I'm a little bit more practical about it, but it's so my thing is I only buy certified used cars.
Right. I
probably represent 70% of the people in the world only buy certified used cars, right? Because it makes the most sense.
Yes.
I mean, there are that that just only buy brand new cars, right? But as soon as you drop that off the lot, it's worth $5,000 less.
Yeah.
I'm I want to buy a certified used EV, but it's wait, they're not
a bit spenny.
Yeah, well, they're just not available. They're not there yet. Yeah. I mean, and so you just kind of, and it's one of those things where it's just pony up.
This is a shout out for our friends over at the EV movement who we've interviewed to start looking at used EV market.
Yeah.
I love it. This is a call out. You know who you are.
Yes.
If you're listening.
I want to say names so bad.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It has been a real pleasure, and I don't know, I feel really good.
Yeah, I'm optimistic.
Yep. And remember,
stay curious. Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure you get next week's release.
We are now officially crowdsourcing Climate Confession, so please leave yours in the ratings and the reviews section, and we'll shout out a few next time. And shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
This episode was produced by Josie Coulter.
Comms written by Tess Lowry.
Artwork designed by Rebecca Mingus.
Curation by Maryam Pasha.
Mixed and engineered by Ben Beheshti.
Music also by Ben Beheshti.
Presented by Ben Hurst
and Maryam Pasha. Remember, stay curious.